Hello and welcome. With the spotlight on India Africa ties, we're joined for a very special and exclusive interaction with Wamkele Mene. He is the Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Thank you for your time. I'd like to begin by asking you, how was your meeting with Nandan Nilekani, the Aadhaar architect of India?
We discussed in detail the progress that India made in digital public infrastructure establishment, in particular how the country successfully onboarded onto digital platforms for identification purposes almost the entire population of India. And we discussed other benefits also of the readiness for the digital economy. So it was a very, very good meeting.
What, to your mind, then were the key takeaways from this meeting with Mr. Nandan Nilekani?
What I would say is that there are some areas where the African continent has significantly advanced. For example, mobile-enabled payments is significantly advanced. And so we've made excellent progress there. There are some areas where lessons can be learned, and certainly in this case where we can learn from the experience of India, and that is a digital identity, which not only establishes a digital public population register, but more importantly, is able to ensure that millions and millions of people are part of the country's economy. So addressing the very important imperative of financial and economic inclusion is one of the goals. And so the progress on the continent is uneven. There are some areas where we've made giant strides. There are some areas where we have quite a lot of work to do.
Now, PM Modi has been emphasizing on the importance of cooperation, exchange for ideas, in particular the South and the South. What really would you say then is a larger picture or the message from such interactions?
That's a very good point. The African Union was welcomed as a member of the G20 under the presidency of India, and in particular the efforts of Prime Minister Modi to make sure that the African Union does indeed become part of the G20, and that effort was undertaken because India and the Prime Minister in particular are very strong advocates of South-South collaboration and cooperation. And so the context of our visit here and the sharing of expertise and experience that not only today, but going forward that we will embark on is based on that South-South cooperation and the importance of learning from one another, particularly for economic development purposes. And so as far as I'm concerned, the context for this visit is exactly that, the importance of South-South cooperation, which, as I say, became very clear when India advanced the proposition that the African Union must be admitted as a member of the G20, and that happened indeed successfully.
So, what really would be the concrete timelines, really, for what you've discussed, the exchange of ideas, and more importantly, an implementation of a UPI-like model in Africa?
We agreed today that we will develop an action plan that we will propose to the Assembly of Heads of States and Government of the African Union for implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area's protocol on digital trade. It's a very important instrument for readiness for the digital economy of the African continent. So we agreed as an immediate step that we must have an action plan that is developed, which will enable us to immediately start work on implementation of the digital trade protocol, working with co-develop as a very strong partner of the work that lies ahead. And of course, based on the experience of India in these very specific areas of the protocol. So we start working immediately.
Okay, but for all viewers really and consumers tracking this, by when do you feel that they will see the light of the day of a UPI like system absolutely functional in Africa, across Africa?
The experience of India is that in this country, it took between 6 to 8 years. And now for digital identity, India has onboarded 90, if not just over 90% of the population. And that was achieved in less than 6 or 7 years. So that's very, very good progress in a short space of time. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we have made quite significant progress on payments, a continental platform for payments. So where we and actually users, we see transactions, digital transactions being made across the 42 currencies in Africa being made on a digital platform called the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. So some progress, important progress achieved there. The timeline that we have is within 4 or 5 years, 4 to 5 years rather. We must have onboarded, similar to India, 90 to 95% of the population of Africa's population, which is 1.4 billion people, similarly populated to India, that in that period of 4 to 5 years, this must become a reality in terms of digital identities, including concluding the rollout of the Continental Payments Platform, which I've just mentioned, the establishment of other aspects of digital public infrastructure, that 4 to 5 years from now, that these must be in place. It sounds ambitious, but certainly from the experience of India, it is doable.
As someone who's looking at trade very, very closely, how do you think Africa is looking to do trade in the near term and the long term?
The African Continental Free Trade Area is a free trade area that comprises 48 out of 55 countries on the African continent. And the objective is to establish a single integrated market for trade, for investment on the African continent, eliminating barriers to intra-Africa trade, eliminating barriers to intra-Africa investment, to create a single market is the reason why the free trade area was established. It was established within a broader context of economic and political integration under the framework of the African Union, but with a special emphasis on trade and investment. Barriers, intra-Africa barriers to trade are very high relative to other regions of the world. Intra-Africa barriers to investment are very high relative to other parts of the world. For example, there are, by some estimates, intra-Africa trade is between 16 to 18%, which is low. If you compare intra-Africa trade with intra-regional trade of other regions, European Union is close to 70%. North America is close to 50%. So that indicates that the depth of integration, of economic and market integration in Africa is certainly not there. And so the AFCFTA seeks to establish a combined a market that combines 1.4 billion people, that consolidates on a GDP of $3.4 trillion, which is projected. Africa's combined GDP is projected by the year 2035 to reach close to $16.3 trillion. But that $16.3 trillion projection will not be reached if we continue to be a fragmented market. So the AfCFTA, on the one hand, is a political objective, and that is unification of the continent, which largely has been achieved. It's also an economic objective, which is to create a single market that will be competitive, where goods will be produced and transit across borders with very, very little tariff restrictions and non-tariff barriers, as well as a free flow of investment across countries. Not only are we focusing on trade in goods, but as we have just discussed, we are also focusing on Africa's digital economy to create a single digital market. And this is a very ambitious objective. It is, however, within the realms of possibility.
Lastly, we are living in times with rising geopolitical tensions and concerns. What really do you think are the near-term challenges, and how do you think the world can overcome these?
Well, the geopolitical tensions, geoeconomic tensions that have become pronounced over the last few years, starting with the COVID-19 pandemic, the war between Russia and Ukraine, the unjust war against Palestinian people, that also affects regional stability, particularly for countries in North Africa who are affected by the genocide that is being carried out on Palestinian people. All of these events around the world have an impact on the African continent, and they compel the African continent to consider very, very drastic and immediate steps for creating an integrated and independent market. I will give you an example. The African continent is overly reliant on global supply chains. What we learned during the COVID-19 pandemic period is that an over-reliance on global supply chains causes vulnerabilities when those global supply chains are disrupted, as we saw during the pandemic. And so part of the work of the AfCFTA is to contribute to the establishment of supply chains that will ensure Africa's self-sufficiency, not by disengaging from the global economy, by remaining in the global economy, however, with a much, much higher degree of self-sufficiency. Similarly, when the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine, we saw an adverse impact on the African continent, and that is an increase in the cost of food because of the over-reliance of imports of grains from Russia, Ukraine. And so these are examples that I cite to underscore the importance of an integrated economy in Africa, an integrated market that results in a degree of self-sufficiency. We have made very, very important progress since the COVID-19 pandemic. So, for example, in 2020, in March 2020, Africa's capacity to produce vaccines was almost non-existent. We now have the capacity, which was developed in less than 3 years, to produce and source vaccines, not only for COVID-19, against other pandemics as well. That has happened. For example, in Rwanda, we have a vaccine producing manufacturing capacity that was recently established. Other countries are producing oxygen for exports. So we have seen that these crises, as much as they have presented challenges, they have compelled us as Africans to reflect on what exactly steps we need to take to ensure our economic self-sufficiency. And so we look at these crises as opportunities also for us to make progress on our journey for integration of the African economy.
All right. Thank you so much for this insightful interaction. Thank you for your time.